What's up, guys? Welcome back. I'm Mike.
And I'm Brit.
And we were $120,000 in debt when we got married.
And now we have a net worth of $150,000.
Today we're going to talk about how we did it, how we made the financial turnaround, how long it took, and what we learned.
So $120,000 may or may not sound like a lot of money depending on your financial situation, but for us it was a ton of money.
And it wasn't like this was a mortgage that we were paying down at 3.5%. This was all consumer debt. This was student loans, car loans, we had a little bit of money on a credit card. But having this level of consumer debt put us in a very tough spot financially because we were just starting our jobs and our careers when we got married. We barely had the income to support the payments on all this debt, plus pay for everything else we needed to pay for just for us to be able to live day to day.
So the $120,000 we had in debt was about 3 times the amount we were making in 1 year. The payments alone were close to $1,400 per month, and that was half our take-home pay.
Yeah, which left us $1,400 to $1,500 a month to pay for everything else we needed to pay for. So as you guys could probably imagine, very tough spot for us financially.
And today we're in a completely different spot.
So the $150,000 net worth that we have today, again, may not sound like much just depending on your situation, especially when you have YouTubers every now and then talking about how they make this much money in a month. But for us, this represents years and years of hard work, blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice that we put into just getting this far. So before we get into things, allow us to just briefly describe a little bit about how we wound up in this situation with all this debt to begin with.
So there were a lot of actions that we took that led to our situation, but it basically came down to 3 principles.
The first one being that we lacked education, financial education specifically. So Edward Everett once said that education is a better safeguard of liberty than a standing army, which I thought was interesting because liberty, freedom, individual liberty, this is huge, right? And we're talking about personal finance, which is like, way down here. Freedom's like way up here. We're talking about stuff that's way down here. And I'm thinking if education can safeguard freedom, like this huge of a thing, like what could proper financial education done to Brittany's and my finances? The second thing was that the people we were immediately associating with in our lives were in the situation that we were in pretty much, meaning they had a lot of debt. There's an old proverb that says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the mental composure of his friend. And Jim Rohn says something similar. He says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And since the people that Brittany and I were associating with on a day-to-day basis, those people were deeply in debt, most of them, that had an influence on us. So combining the lack of education, which kind of produced a mental state that was void of the infrastructure which allowed us to think critically about our finances, combine that with having an immediate circle of peers that rubbed off on us in terms of having a lot of debt. It didn't take very long for us to accumulate a lot of debt ourselves.
Especially for us growing up, it was seen as normal to be in debt, so it didn't take long for us to accumulate that as well.
Yeah. Okay, the third thing, we knew this was a bad decision all along. We're not trying to make excuses here and blame everybody else. Like when Brittany and I were signing the papers, especially for all the student loans we took out.
Yeah, it was us signing the papers.
Yeah, and our gut instincts told us this is probably a bad idea, but we did it anyway. So at the end of the day, it's our fault. It's nobody else's fault but ours. But those other things did kind of come into play in terms of our decision making.
And our thinking. So the person who inspired us to get us onto a better path financially was Dave Ramsey.
So Brittany's dad bought us tickets to one of his live events years and years ago. We decided very shortly after it was over that we wanted no part of the future that we were about to create for ourselves. That's when we decided to do something about it.
So the steps we took from there aren't going to sound like anything special. They're very basic and straightforward.
So if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey at all, you'll probably recognize the first few things that Brittany and I did in his baby steps, because that's pretty much what we followed for a long time, is the Dave Ramsey baby steps. But in general, Brittany and I became very focused and intentional about how we were living. Our lives, at least initially, became 100% about saving money and paying off debt as quickly as possible. So for the rest of the video, Brittany and I are pretty much going to be explaining a timeline and the decisions we made on that timeline. And it's going to be very difficult to do in a 10 or 15 minute video because we're basically going through almost a decade of our lives here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put links to other videos up here in this corner that correspond to what we're talking about, that we've expanded upon much more deeply than we'll have time to go into in this video. So you guys can click on those and watch those later if you want to.
So year 0, that's when we got married, and our net worth was negative $120,000 because that's how much debt we had.
Yep. The first thing we did is we saved a very small emergency fund. So that's actually the first one of Dave Ramsey's baby steps, is just to save a baby emergency fund. He recommends $1,000. We did not do that. We recognized that the level of debt that we had was going to take us a long time to pay off. And we did not feel comfortable at all having $1,000 in savings for years and years and years. So we chose to put, I think, between like $3,000 and $5,000 in an emergency fund at the time. And this was something that we didn't really have to save up because we already had money set aside.
Yeah, we were both saving money individually. So when we got married, we had a good starting point.
Yeah, so we didn't have anything earmarked for an emergency fund, but we did earmark this for an emergency fund.
So the second thing we did was we started budgeting. So this was brand new to us, and it took us a while to work out the kinks and the arguments involved in that. But it was a great habit for us to develop and something that helped us a lot moving forward.
Yeah, budgeting, there's a stigma around budgeting in society. I'm not sure if it's the word or whatever else, but I think people think a budget constrains you, and you can think of it that way if you want to, but for us, it's more of like a spending plan. We're being intentional with our money. Like, we're saying this much money is going here, this much money is going here. We are telling the money we make where to go instead of us just spending it randomly and having no idea what's going on. So that's what a budget was to us. We do have our budget template available. It's free. It's in the description. If you want to get started on a budget, you can take a look at that. We also have some other debt payoff resources we'll link below. The third thing we did was we got more jobs. So Brittany and I recognized that there is no way we're paying off $120,000 of debt with like a $48,000 income. In the beginning, our income was around there, $40,000 to $50,000 a year. We got between like 5 and 6 jobs between the two of us. So we both had like the normal jobs that we did. Brittany got one more. I got like 2 or 3 more.
It was a lot.
So by the end of our debt-free journey, we were earning close to $140,000 a year, which allowed us to pay down $60,000 of debt in the last year that we were paying off debt. So the first 60 we paid off in 2 years. The last $60,000 we were able to pay off in 1 year.
So we also realized that working that much was not sustainable for us or healthy moving forward. So
long term.
Yeah, long term. So it kind of changed our thinking a little bit about how we wanted to make money.
Yeah, but in terms of paying off debt, we paid our debts off for the most part, smallest to largest. That's not the most efficient way to pay things off mathematically, because you're technically earning more interest on the largest interest debts than you are on the smaller ones if they're kind of mismatched. But there is something to be said about the psychology involved in paying things off. Yeah. Like, you get this hit of dopamine with everything you pay off.
It just motivates you to keep going.
Yeah, so that's kind of what happened to us. Although I do understand like the mathematical argument for paying things off highest interest rate to lowest interest rate.
So something else we both did during this time period was we sold our cars. So I had a car loan and Mike had a car loan as well. So that helped eliminate a huge chunk of debt because we both got a lot less expensive cars that were used.
Yeah, so in total it took us 3 years to pay off $120,000. At this point, we have a $0 net worth, but we're debt free.
Yeah.
We have no debt. So what we did next is we saved up a 6-month emergency fund. We already had a little bit of money saved up from our starter emergency fund from before. Now it was time to beef up this emergency fund to a fully fledged 6-month emergency fund. So in order to do this, we lived pretty much how we were living when we were becoming debt free. We were saving every extra dollar we could, putting it toward this emergency fund.
Yeah, not spending money on anything.
Yeah, like we were keeping our heads down, we were going to work, coming home, being very efficient with our shopping and things like that. Every little aspect of our lives was centered around saving this emergency fund.
So after our 6-month emergency fund was done, we still continued to save money. And we weren't 100% sure for what. We did have ideas about buying a house, but we still weren't sure at this point what to do next.
Yeah, so after our emergency fund was fully done, we did give ourselves a little bit more spending money. While we were becoming debt free, I think we gave ourselves like $40 per month of fund money just to go out and spend on whatever we wanted. I think at this point,
that was like total, like $20 for me and $20 for both of us, because Mike didn't want to go out, but I tried convincing him to every now and then. So
the main point here is we were still living like we were getting out of debt, just with a little bit more fund money. Okay, year 4. This is around the time we'd be able to save about $17,000. So our emergency fund plus a little bit of extra. We made a very spur-of-the-moment decision not to buy a house, but to move to Hawaii instead. This is very last minute. We didn't have much time to think about it.
Most people plan things out a year or 2 years in advance.
This was like 2 months.
Yeah.
Brittany took a work contract in Hawaii. We sold most of our belongings here on the mainland, and we booked a one-way flight to Hawaii with 3 suitcases and 2 backpacks. And that was it. Up until this point in our lives, we had been living very frugally, very safe. We've been very risk averse, and we felt like we wanted to live a little bit now, since we had spent 4 years up until this point just basically not having a life at all. So we're like, let's go to Hawaii. We saw this as like our first big risk that we took. It was in Hawaii that we learned what life could look like living it on our own terms. It was an incredible life-changing experience. We don't have time to go into it in this video, but it changed a lot about how we thought about money.
And how we thought about making money as well. Because we had some ideas, like we mentioned before, but this really solidified it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find work because the work environment in Hawaii is very different than it is here on the mainland, or at least on the island that we were on. Some medical things came up. Brittany sustained an injury. She couldn't work, and it was going to take a long time for her to be seen by a doctor specific for this injury. So we were faced with a tough decision. Do we stay in Hawaii and just kind of eat away at our emergency fund until we basically have nothing left, or risk not having anything left in a couple months? Or do we move back to the mainland where I can get back to work and Brittany can get seen by her doctors and we can just kind of start over again?
Right.
That's the path we chose because we had no idea how long things were going to take if we stayed in Hawaii.
Yeah, and also the type of jobs that Mike was able to find, we knew were not going to sustain us over there.
However, now I had a totally new financial goal. We wanted to get to the place financially where we could afford to move back to Hawaii, but not necessarily have to have a job in Hawaii, if that makes sense. So we wanted to work on passive income.
So year 5, we had a $6,000 net worth.
Yeah, so we had gone down substantially.
And because, like Mike had mentioned before, we were in a difficult time, we moved in with his mom to help save on costs and just get back up on our feet.
Yeah, I mean, because neither of us really had an income. I had a little bit of an income. Brittany had none. So during this time, we lived pretty much even more disciplined than we did when we were paying everything off, when we were paying off all of our debt, because again, we had no money. Very slowly, I was able to build up a client base again. Brittany was able to go see her doctors. She got better. She eventually got a part-time job. My income was back up to pretty much the point where it was before we had left. And then Brittany got a full-time job.
And then things started to pick up and it was feeling like things were back to normal.
So it was at this point, year 6, where our net worth was about $12,000. And now we moved into the first apartment we had had. Obviously, since we're not living with my mom anymore, our rent is substantially higher than it used to be.
Yeah.
After, I think, a year or 2 living in the apartment, we did take a vacation. But again, we lived very disciplined. We kept our heads down. We worked our butts off, and we saved every extra penny we could, just like we had when we were paying everything off. We were very intentional with our spending.
So it was during this time that we had a huge realization that if we continued on the path we were, saving money was just going to be way too slow for getting us to the financial goals we wanted to get to. We realized that unless we start making our money work for us, we were going to work for money until we died.
So we started thinking about ways that we could make passive income and ways that we could start making our money work for us. And it was here where we started experimenting with YouTube and affiliate marketing and things like that. So this is actually not our first YouTube channel that we've made, or this is our first YouTube channel that Brittany and I have made together.
Yeah.
But I made a few before this one, just as experiments. And we tried other things in terms of building passive income and whatnot. All right, year 8, about 2 years after moving into the apartment, we had saved up $75,000. We now had a $75,000 net worth. And we're not including our cars in these measurements just because they weren't worth all that much. So with all the money we had saved, or a large chunk of it, we decided to buy our first house. We put $28,000 down payment on our first house. This first house of ours, we thought of more as like an investment property, even though it was going to be a house that we lived in terms of the customization that we did to it. We built it from like the ground up pretty much, even though it was done through a builder. Like we were able to customize the process, so to speak.
So we could pick out things for upgrades, and we were very strategic with the upgrades. Everything we picked was intentional with the purpose of bringing a return on the investment. So we wanted to basically increase the home value as much as possible.
So the upgrades had to be proper to the area, but not too expensive. They had to make our house look unique, but not like too unique, just stuff like that. So we put a lot of thought into this, and it paid off. Unfortunately, however, there were some things that came up with the house that were totally out of our control that made it very difficult to live there after a while. And so we were, again, faced with a decision, well, do we sell it or do we endure what's going on?
Right.
And things got so bad that we just decided to sell it. Fortunately, though, I mean, that coincided with this great housing market that's been happening, so that also helped in the profit that we were able to make from it. So. Okay, year 9, $140,000 net worth. This is in large part due to getting our down payment back from our house plus about $30,000 in profit. The vast majority of that we just invested in the stock market. This is kind of our second big risk. We actually should have mentioned something before. While we were in our house, we did invest a little bit of money. We started funding our Roth IRAs, but that was it. Roth IRAs, $6,000 a year is not much you can invest.
And so it's about $12,000 total.
Yeah, so we did have a little bit of money in the stock market, but after we moved into this current apartment we're in, like we just it's just like we just turned the floodgates on into the amount of money we're putting in the stock market.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like what we're calling our second big risk, because we've never managed this much money before. And it's like psychologically is just very different than managing tens of thousands of dollars in a savings account, which you have complete control over. Now you're putting all this stuff into the market, which you can't control. So it's different. But that being said, we've made a pretty decent return so far. I think we're up close to 10% in the stock market in like 6 months. And that's pretty much where we are today. So if you guys are curious, our investments, we have a little over $111,000. Our emergency fund right now is about $23,000. We have other cash that adds up to very, very close to $17,000, which totals $151,000 or around there.
So in almost a decade, we made more than $250,000 turnaround. So what did we learn in that time frame?
The first thing we want to talk about is that it doesn't take big changes in your life to change your life in a big way. Brittany and I have noticed, at least for us, is like it really only takes a few small changes that are implemented very consistently over time to make big changes in your life.
So you don't have to do like this one big thing.
Yeah. Something else that we learned, at least for us, it makes things a lot easier if you take responsibility for yourself. Like if you're in a situation that you want to get out of, don't expect other people to get you out of it, even if it's something that you didn't create. And I know there are like nuances and specific circumstances where this may not work, but like, I don't know, it's just much more freeing if you take your situation into your own hands. So the next thing we learned, or it's not like these are in order in terms of the timeline that we learned these in, but regarding Dave Ramsey, we have a lot of respect for Dave Ramsey. His advice and his team's advice about getting out of financial hardship and onto a better path financially and paying off debt is extremely good.
Yeah.
Like it's very, very effective if you do it. However, what we have noticed, especially for me, is that it has made me very risk averse. It's made me a very risk averse person. This is a great tendency to have when paying off debt and like digging yourself out of a hole. But if you're trying to make your money grow, this is not a very good tendency to have.
It's not.
So I've noticed myself struggling, especially with investing money in the stock market. It's like, because Brittany and I have lived like we've been paying off debt for so long, it's like it's very hard to get out of this mindset. It's like, well, no, we can't put our money here because we're going to risk losing it. Or like we have to hold on to as much money as we can. That's just something I've noticed. There's no hate toward Dave Ramsey. We love Dave Ramsey. Another thing is that while his advice is very good about getting out of debt, in my opinion, it's a bit lacking when it comes to investing in like what to do after you're debt free. If anybody is watching who may be paying off debt and like are close to paying off debt, kind of wondering what to do next, we have found Robert Kiyosaki's books to be like almost a perfect step from Dave Ramsey
into the investing. And we know Dave Ramsey does give other steps, and he does talk about investing 15% of your income. So if you find yourself in a similar situation that Mike was in, where you're extremely risk averse, Robert Kiyosaki is a good way of helping to change that mindset. It helped both of us.
Yeah.
Also, another thing we learned during this time period was the more money you have working for you, the easier it is to make money.
So if you guys didn't notice, like the first few years of this process Brittany and I went through, like our net worth was very slow to go up, and then it went up, we were debt free, and then it went down, and like it was just very slow. But toward the end, it's just like skyrocketing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've made $10,000 in the last 6 months without doing anything, just by having money in the stock market. So like the more money you have, if you put it in the right places, the easier it is to accumulate more money. We don't really have anything profound to say other than that, but that's something we've noticed.
And also to add on to what Mike was saying, when we also took calculated risks, like what you saw when we were very strategic about our house and the upgrades and then also selling it, we doubled our money basically in that. And also we were strategic with our investments, and that's been helping as well. Yeah. And those were both calculated risks.
And with that being said, guys, that's all we have. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a huge thumbs up. It helps out tremendously with the YouTube algorithm.
Also, subscribe for more, and you can follow us on Instagram at It's Mike and Brit. We post there every now and then.
Yeah, thanks again, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.